My name is Donna Lieberman. I'm the Executive Director of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Thank you all for coming, and those of you for virtually coming who are on the phone. The NYCLU is pleased to host today's briefing with some of the most respected educators in the country. Diane Ravitch, Professor Pedro Noguera, Professor Michelle Fine, Professor Doug Bicklin, Ann Cook, Executive Director of the New York Performance Standards Consortium, each of whom has decades of experience in educational policy and practice. Education is a basic human right. All children have the right not just to time in the classroom, but to real opportunities to learn and grow in a safe, nurturing, and respectful public school environment. That's why we at the NYCLU question the increasing focus on standardized tests, standardized high-stakes tests to decide whether a student can graduate, whether a teacher can continue to teach, and whether a school will remain open. Is this really good for kids? We're not experts like our distinguished guests, but we believe that teaching and learning is a complex, nuanced, and creative process. Actually, we believe that teaching and learning are a complex, nuanced, and creative process. One that cannot be boiled down to a single handy metric like a test score that stands as a proxy for learning, quality of teaching, or school success. Let's not be naive. Testing has a purpose and a place in education. But just as teachers are not infallible, neither are tests or test makers, be they government employees or increasingly members of the private, profit-making, burgeoning education industry. Over the years, high-stakes testing programs have been riddled with scandal, be they test makers rewriting literary classics on the English language exam, or changing the passing grade on the physics regents because the test was so off base that 3 times as many kids as usual would otherwise have failed, or revising English language and math exam cut scores to avoid too many failures on a clearly possibly failed test, or the most recent bizarre adventure with the pineapple and the hare. When everything that goes into educating our children is boiled down into a single and imperfect test score, are we really surprised that it sets up inducements for educators to abandon their best professional instincts and ethics, as we have seen in too many cases that have come to light in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and yes, even in New York City in some schools? Neither should tests built for one purpose be retrofitted to serve other ends. You wouldn't use a hammer to hang wallpaper or fix a toilet. We believe that New York shouldn't use high-stakes standardized tests designed to assess student knowledge as a blunt, one-size-fits-all instrument that creates collateral harm to the most vulnerable students, to their teachers, and to their schools. All children deserve the rich, multidimensional education that will prepare them for productive, creative lives that contribute to the fabric, culture, and economy of our state. And we're delighted to today offer a space where education leaders can open up the conversation with those who make policy and engage the public in this discourse to explore alternative assessments that more accurately reflect student learning, foster greater professional respect and expertise among teachers, and value schools for the living, breathing, vital public institutions that they are. Finally, it's important to note that the conversation we're having today is not happening in a vacuum, fortunately. Throughout the country, there's great momentum against the overuse of testing and high-stakes testing to assess children, evaluate teachers, and close schools. Across the country, More than 400 local school boards have passed resolutions calling for alternatives to high-stakes testing and demanding an overhaul of the federal legislation, No Child Left Behind. That same resolution is being introduced tomorrow in our very own New York City Council by Education Committee Chair Robert Jackson. And in New York State, there have been petitions signed by principals, teachers, parents, and youth. And today we're releasing, and Michelle will talk about, an open letter to the Regents signed by more than 1,100 professors from across New York State articulating their evidence-based concerns about New York State's over-reliance on standardized tests as a metric to determine student, teacher, and school quality. A copy of the materials is available at the door. For those of you on the phone, they're still available at the door. But they're also on our website. So first, I would like to introduce Professor Michelle Fine. She's a distinguished professor of psychology, urban education, and women's studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And for those of you on the phone, hold your horses on questions. We'll take them all at the end, and I'll mediate that process. Okay, Michelle?
Donna, could you just move the microphone over
Yes.
to Michelle?
And I'm moving the mic and one of these guys. And what? And this black phone. Okay.
We're good?
We're doing the the microphone dance.
Good. Good afternoon. As Donna indicated, I'm Michelle Fine, a professor of psychology and urban education at the Graduate Center CUNY. Today I sit here with Professor Noguera, who is on his way, Professor Ravitch of New York University, as well as Dean Doug Bicklin from Syracuse University, because we represent more than 1,100 New York State professors who have signed an open letter to the Regents and to Commissioner King to express our serious scientific and ethical concerns about the state's over-reliance on high-stakes tests. The letter signers include faculty at colleges and university, faculty from upstate and down, from fields of law, education, history, music, sociology, statistics, neuroscience, and more. Many of us have written for more than 3 or 4 decades, critically and extensively about public education and about accountability. But today we are gravely concerned that the accountability agenda, which we believe is so central to the sustainability of a multiracial democracy and to our public institutions, has been reduced, some might say hijacked, by a testing industry with serious adverse consequences, particularly for low-income youth and communities, for educators teaching in schools of concentrated poverty, for English language learners, students in receipt of special education services, and communities where public schools, the last space of public investment and possibility, are being closed. Our views are fundamentally mainstream. Some might say they are conservative. That is, we stand with the American Psychological Association, the American Statistical Association, the American Educational Research Association, in recognition that high-stakes tests should never be the sole or primary criterion for assessing educational achievement for a student, quality of work by an educator, or a school closing. As you will see in our open letter, we are committed to evidence-based policy. We have reviewed national, state, and New York City-based evidence on the impact of high-stakes testing, and we can only conclude that our current state system of high-stakes testing, even on its own terms, does not enhance achievement levels for all students, does not reduce the gaps between wealthy and poor, or white students and students of color. In fact, this high-stakes testing system places youth of color, English language learners, and students in receipt of special ed services at high risk of failure and dropout. In addition, high-stakes testing systems have been associated with depletion of teacher morale and spikes in teacher turnover. And increasingly, we bear witness as testing outcomes over-influence which schools will be closed. even as the national evidence demonstrates unequivocally that school closings are not a school transformation agenda. They do not improve student outcomes. We have signed this letter, however, not simply to critique, but to offer our expertise to the state so that we can work with the regents and the commissioner to create an authentic accountability system, one clearly aligned with the National Common Core and with the New York State standards, by legitimating multiple pathways for assessing student performance. Throughout the nation and internationally, we witness swells of resistance from educators, politicians, parents, students, and communities, poor and wealthy, against high-stakes testing, but for multiple pathways. There are ample exemplars internationally, as Dr. Ravish will articulate, and here in New York State, as our brilliant local educator Ann Cook will detail through the Performance Standards Consortium schools. These are evidence-based strategies of assessment systems that increase achievement, diminish gaps, support teacher professionalism, and help build high-quality schools engaged with rigorous teaching and learning. With our open letter, we ask not for a retreat from accountability. To the contrary, we offer our expertise so that New York State can develop a system of rich, valid, transparent, and equitable assessments that support the education of all children, that support the development of all educators, that support the strengthening of schools that are struggling, so that New York can become a national beacon for excellence and equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Professor Noguera is not here yet, so hopefully he's in the elevator. So we'll move on to Dean Doug Bicklin from the Syracuse School of Education at from Syracuse University School of Education. Okay, Doug? Thank you. Oh yeah, we got a mic dance.
Sorry, I have to move this really heavy open letter signed by so many people. Sorry, it takes a while to carry it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk from an administrative point of view about how these proposed policies are affecting student teachers, but also teachers in the field that we work with and who are our alumni. Everyone knows that multiple factors influence school performance, including school leadership, resources, school culture, absenteeism and attendance rates, student mobility, family income, social emotional supports, health and wellness of students, out-of-school experiences, length of the school day and school year, teacher preparation and professional development, and on and on. It is simply simplistic and dishonest to suggest that one can evaluate teacher performance on the basis alone of high-stakes tests. And the tests the relationship of the tests to teacher performance have never themselves been tested. In many of the classrooms where students find themselves and teachers teach, there are multiple adults in those classrooms. There are specialists coming into those classrooms. Some classrooms are team taught. The proposed system has no way of accounting for these kinds of realities in schools. Principals and teachers, I predict, will be afraid to welcome students with disabilities, students who are English language learners, who have emotional difficulties, who come to school late in the year, or who have a history of low performance in their classrooms. Indeed, as I talk to school administrators, I often hear them saying, well, we had a good cohort this year. We have, we just lost a great cohort of students, so-called good students. So we hear about so-called good students. All students are good students. All students want to learn. The issue is that teaching is a complex business, and student performance relates to all of those factors that I mentioned and many more. Teachers will be reluctant in the schools, we predict, and we already hear, to accept student teachers into their classrooms because of they're saying, we're being judged this year, we don't have time to give to the next generation of teachers. Already we're hearing that from higher education faculty around the state, that schools are warning them about pending cutbacks in student teaching placements. And this is linked to teachers' concerns about spending any time mentoring if it might detract in the slightest from them getting a favorable assessment. Similarly, aspiring teachers, as well as seasoned veterans with great reputations for innovative teaching, will seek to avoid poorly funded, struggling urban schools where test scores have been low. Teachers in low-performing urban schools will seek to move to high-performing suburban schools. These are some of the consequences that are absolutely predictable, almost guaranteed by the proposed system. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bicklin. Or are you known as Dean Bicklin?
Both.
Okay. Doug, thank you. Okay, let's get the mic dance going down to Professor Ravitch. Whoops. We spilled water here, you guys on the phone. That was part of the mic dance. Does somebody have a paper towel from over there?
You know what?
There's napkins.
You need a union card.
Okay, sorry about that, my fault. All right. Sorry, Ann. Okay, Diane?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've been studying and writing about education in this city, state, and nation for about 45 years. And I've never seen a time when there was more demoralization amongst educators. And this is not just in the city, the state, but nationally. They're demoralized largely because of this high-stakes testing, which has become so pervasive over the past decade. High-stakes testing, and educators know this, is bad for children, it's bad for teachers, it's bad for schools. It's also bad for the quality of education. There's a basic rule in psychrometrics, and I spent 7 years on the National Assessment Governing Board, which oversees the federal testing program. The basic rule is tests should be used only for the purpose for which they're designed. And we're now using tests as a one-size-fits-all measure for everything, to close schools, fire teachers, decide which kids will be held back and which will be promoted. Tests today, particularly the high-stakes tests we're using, are being misused because punishments and rewards are attached to them. That's what makes them high stakes, is that if the kids don't get high enough scores, there'll be terrible consequences for the children, for their teachers, and for their schools and their principals. Tests should be used, and I'm not opposed to testing, but they should be used appropriately. And appropriate test use is where there are no stakes attached, where tests are used to gain information, where they're used to find out how children are doing in order to help them, in order to help their teachers, but they're used to diagnose and to support. So I want to talk just a minute about Finland, because I was in Finland last fall, and it's very impressive. Finland is a country that over the past 10 years has been either number 1 or 2 or 3 in all the international assessments, and they're number 1, 2, or 3 in the world in reading, math, and science, and they've stayed there consistently over the past decade. And what makes it so interesting is they do the opposite of everything we do. They have no standardized testing at all. And when you visit their classrooms, what you find is that the children are engaged in the arts, they're doing physical education, sometimes they're doing both. They have a national curriculum that is not prescriptive, but it guarantees that all children will have the arts and history and science and physical education and mathematics, and that then it's left to the professional judgment of the teachers as to how to design the curriculum for their school and their children. The children don't take standardized tests, but they do take tests. They take tests that their teachers make because their teachers know what they've been taught and know what should be expected of them. And what they do instead of testing is they have a laser-like focus on helping children learn, starting at the very earliest ages. And they surround them with caring adults who are professionally trained and prepared to help kids. And they say they focused on equity and ended up getting excellence. So that's a good target. What they wanted to do in Finland was to foster creativity, ingenuity, imagination, risk-taking. And they knew that if they had a high-stakes testing regime, they would crush the very skills that we need for the 21st century, creativity and ingenuity and critical thinking and imagination. So I think what we're seeing in New York State and what we're seeing across the country because of No Child Left Behind, because of the pressure that Race to the Top brings to teach to the test, because if you don't teach to the test, you'll be fired, your school will be closed. All of this pressure illustrates something that social scientists and educators know as Campbell's Law. And Campbell's law says that when you raise the stakes on a test, you corrupt the test. The measure stops being valid because people forget why they're testing, and all they want to do is focus on the targets. And so by reaching for the target of getting the scores higher and higher and higher, what happens is that the curriculum gets narrowed. There are schools that stop the arts. They don't have time for that. They cut back on physical education because they don't have time for that. More time has to be devoted to preparing to take the test. They don't have time for science experiments. They may have some time for the textbook, but not for the time to go out and look in the neighborhood and find out how science actually works. They don't have time for history because that's not tested. So all they have time for then is the testing and the test prep, and they're getting a bad education. So this is how Campbell's law illustrates the corruption that the testing brings when you attach high stakes to it. Not just the narrowing of the curriculum, but also the cheating scandals that we've seen in district after district, and where we'll see more of them. And also just the incentivizing of teachers to teach to what are, in most cases, really not very good tests. If you spend 8 years of your life picking 1 out of 4 bubbles, you're not prepared for the kind of creative work and critical thinking that we expect of our young adults when they leave school. So this is why I'm very hopeful that the powers that be in Albany, and for that matter in Washington and all over this country, will listen to the voices that are coming from teachers, from parents, from educators, and take heed and change course. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, Pedro Noguera is now here, but I'm going to let him catch his breath for a minute, and we'll move on to Ann Cook. Ann is the Executive Director of the New York Performance Standards Consortium, which is a coalition of New York State public high schools. Ann, take the mics. And don't spill any water.
Good morning, or afternoon, I guess it is now. You've heard a lot about it doesn't work that we pay kids to raise test scores. We've tried that. It doesn't work. We know that incentivizing teachers with bonuses that are based on pupils' test score performance also doesn't work. And we know that paying principals extra money to produce higher scores in their schools has failed. And we know that requiring high school graduates to pass 5 Regents exams with 65 has not prepared them to qualify for credit-bearing college work. We also know at the same time that students can succeed if they're challenged and they're evaluated in a meaningful way. And students, teachers, and schools right now badly need pathways to replace one-size-fits-all instruments. They need a model that can encourage rather than destroy quality teaching and innovative curriculum. There's one model that I know about, and it's called the New York Performance Standards Consortium. It's a performance assessment system that's designed and implemented by educators, by practitioners. It's now in its 14th year. The consortium includes 28 New York State public high schools. Most of them are in New York, in the city. And they use a system of performance-based assessment to graduate their students. In addition to the performance assessments, the students take 1 Regents exam, which is the English Language Arts. The consortium, as you've heard many of the speakers refer to learning as complex, the consortium believes that learning is complex, and since it's complex, assessment should be as well. The performance assessment system requires students to write analytic literary essays, in-depth social studies papers. It requires them to create, carry out, and defend original science experiments, and to show proficiency in the application of mathematical concepts. And schools in the consortium can also require students to demonstrate mastery in a second language, creative arts, service learning, art criticism. An essential feature of the system is an on-demand oral defense of the student's work. Now, the consortium's infrastructure also includes ongoing professional development. It includes the development of and refinement of rubrics. It has moderation studies to ensure reliability, outcome studies to establish validity, and the involvement of external assessors through a performance assessment review board. The data that has just been released in a new report, which we'll make available to you, provides evidence that the consortium's model of performance-based accountability works. The data shows the following, that despite having slightly higher numbers of challenged students, that's all kids, English language learners, low-income students, and special needs students, on an equal level or even more challenging than the New York City schools, the results are better, far better. 93% of the consortium school graduates attending four-year colleges are still there in their second year, compared with 75% nationally and 80% in New York State. And even more astonishing, 84% of those attending two-year colleges persist into their second year, compared to 54% nationally and 59% in New York State. Consortium schools graduate 70% of their English language learners in 4 years, and that's compared to 40% citywide. And the consortium schools' four-year graduation rate for special ed kids is double that of non-consortium New York City high schools. Since we know that according to the research, a stable teaching staff contributes significantly to student achievement, we should pay attention to the data which shows that consortium schools have succeeded in creating professional communities that are 4 times more stable than non-consortium schools. That's 15% attrition rate compared with a 58% attrition rate for non-consortium schools. This system of practitioner-designed, student-focused, externally assessed, non-commercial performance-based assessment is a viable policy and pathway for accountability. And we urge that the Board of Regents and the Commissioner will allow additional schools to join those that have already been able to benefit from this system. Thank you.
Okay. Mic check. Mic check. Thank you. I said that intentionally. Okay. Okay. All right. And now Pedro Noguera, who is the Peter L. Agnew Professor of Education at NYU.
Thanks, Donna. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. I want to thank the New York Civil Liberties Union for hosting us, and thank my colleague Michelle Fine for leading us in this very important effort to try to call the state's attention, and when I say the state, I really mean the public's attention, to this clear failure of public policy. I'm gotten kind of tired now of actually trying to appeal to public officials because it seems as though they're stuck on a policy for which there's very little evidence to support. And at a certain point, you have to ask why it is that we continue down a path that clearly is producing the kinds of distortions and failures that you've heard others speak about already. One of the reasons why I was late today is because I'm speaking at 2 graduation ceremonies. One is the School for Integrated Studies here in Manhattan. The other is Flushing High School. What's interesting about both of those schools is that they're being closed. They're being phased out for being failing schools. I was talking to the principal of the School for Integrated Studies today, and she said she was given 1 year to turn around her school. This is a school where the average test score for entering 9th graders is 1.5. Okay. Now, the first question we should ask is, given that we have ended social promotion in New York City, why are there so many students entering high school at a level 1 who effectively are reading at an elementary school level? There is no school I know of in the world that can turn around that situation under those circumstances. And it was clear from the very beginning that this was not even a serious request. She started noticing that repairs were being made, that a new gym was being installed, the building was being painted, and when she started asking what's all this for, they said, well, to make room for the new school. This was before the formal decision was made that the school would be closed. What we're witnessing here is a shell game, where the neediest students are being channeled into the struggling schools, and these schools are then being closed. And the Department of Education, I'd say with the complicity of the state of New York, is pretending that this is reform. This is not reform. This is an abuse of our neediest students, who are then being placed in schools where the teachers are being blamed for their inability to meet their needs. This, to me, is not only a distortion of the way in which we use testing, which I think the other speakers have spoken about already, which should be used largely for diagnostic purposes, not for ranking purposes. But it is, I think, also a way in which we have reneged on our commitment to provide quality education to all children in the state. There are now hundreds of SIR schools across the state, that is, schools under improvement that the state itself has identified. That number is not going down. If there were no other evidence that what we're doing is not working, I would say it's right there. It is very clear that it takes more than pressure and humiliation to improve schools. But that is, in effect, New York State's policy, and it is not working. Ann Cook, I think, has made a very compelling case that there is another way to approach this. That is, that we can focus on providing our children with a stimulating educational environment where we focus instead on enriching the curriculum, on supporting teachers, on engaging parents as partners. That's a different strategy. It's a strategy that relies on a different question. Instead of focusing on how to raise student achievement, what we should be focused on is how do we get students excited about learning? Think about that question for a moment and think about how differently we would approach organizing our schools, supporting our teachers, if the focus were on getting students excited to become learners. We don't have that strategy in place now. Instead, we use fear as the primary motivator of student achievement. We're using testing as a weapon instead of as a tool. And there is, again, no evidence that this works. I was contacted recently by a reporter in a very affluent community in Connecticut who told me that they were faced with a dilemma. And the dilemma was this. The students had just taken the state exam, and they all had done extremely well. And that's not surprising, because the strongest predictor for how well a child will do on these tests is how much money their family earns. And she then said, the teachers are not sure what they should do next. And so she was asking me for suggestions. And I said, well, this is an odd question. And she says, well, they are so focused on getting the kids ready for the test, and now it's April, the test is over, and they don't know what to do, so they're taking field trips all the time. And I said, well, now they actually have a chance to teach them and to do something interesting and to make their classrooms come to life. She said, really? I said, yeah, really, because that's what school should be about. What a sad distortion of what we've made school about now. That we actually think that preparing kids for a test constitutes an education that's worth the paper or that diploma will be printed on. We have ample evidence, and I think Ann spoke to already, of large numbers of students across New York State who come to school, graduating from our high schools, having passed tests, who are unprepared for college, who have to retake remedial courses. It's clear this strategy is not working. We need a different approach. And so this is an appeal not to our policymakers, who I think are wedded to this idea. They just adopted a new strategy that will allow us to judge teachers by student test scores. So they're taking us further down this path. So this is an appeal to the public. And those of you out there listening who recognize that an education is fundamentally about ensuring our democracy, about preparing kids to become citizens, to be critical thinkers, need to understand that the people in charge do not know what they're doing. And we need a different change, a different strategy, a different policy in place. Thank you.
So that's some pretty powerful stuff, I think, that we've heard this afternoon. And I'd now like to open the floor and the phones up for questions.
Because more affluent students can afford test prep, and do you think that unfairly advantages them?
Pedro or Doug?
The students from affluent families do better irrespective of test prep. By the time they get to high school, they have access to test prep in a way that lots of other students don't have. But that's really not the issue here. The issue is simply that if you look at test scores, there's a relationship between higher test scores and affluence.
And I would just add that it's students who receive an enriched education that are doing well on the test. And it's largely because of the education. If you go to schools where kids are being challenged and where there's a rich curriculum in place, they're not even worried about the test, because the fact is that they know that kids will do well. It's the schools that have now dumbed down the curriculum to be test preparation, where there's great anxiety about the test and where the tests are doing the greatest harm. Although I would say you could make the case that it's doing harm lots of places.
Thank you. Other questions on the phone? In the House?
Hi, my name's Amelia Payne from the Epoch Times.
Okay.
I wanted to ask, I want to mention that sometimes students come from families who have parents that have not graduated from high school, and they just don't have the learning culture, that culture of studying and preparing for tests. What do schools plan on doing to help that?
Well, hold on. Let's do the mic dance. Okay. All right. Okay, Ann Cook is going to respond.
I think there are lots of things that schools can do. I think it's always helpful if parents are involved, but there are lots of students whose parents are working 2 jobs, who don't have a place at home to do work, and I think it's really the school's responsibility to find a way to reach out to these students. There are all kinds of ways students can help other students. There's all kinds of labs that you can build into your school culture. Schools do things like pizza math at lunchtime, where they're giving extra help to kids who need help in math. I think it's the school's responsibility to reach out to students to work with them. And I think that the results of the data that we have from schools that have very challenged populations, that come from families that are first generation, that are really working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs, where there aren't parents around to help support the kids at home, those schools have found ways to reach out to students and to help them prepare. And I think it's coupled with the curriculum and the instructional model in the schools that engages kids and keeps them interested in what it is that they're working on. Rather than test prep, you have students actually reading primary source materials, working on questions that don't have easy answers, having discussions in the classroom so that students are really hearing what each other thinks about important issues. I think those are ways of helping students acquire the skills that they may lack.
Okay. Michelle?
This is Paul Reed at the Post-Standard.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Paul.
You've already said that the state isn't really listening to what you're saying, and I'm wondering how you're hoping to create change here and whether there's any legal action that might be possible.
Was that question for me?
And you're holding all of the mics.
I'm holding all the mics ready to pass them along. This press conference is not about, planned legal action. This press conference is really about the policy conversation that needs to go on in the state of New York, that needs to engage the public as well as policy makers. Every child in the state of New York is entitled to a sound basic education as a matter of fundamental state constitutional right, not just a basic human right, if you want to have New York law trumping human rights principles. But of course, when our schools fail to provide every child with their fundamental right, there is the potential for litigation. We are hoping that we can pierce the wrong-headed equation of tests and accountability and success that seems to have taken over our schools of late, and substitute for that, or at least allow models that substitute for that, educator-developed, child-focused mechanisms for assessment that don't stifle education, but rather are part of promoting education and learning. So that's what today's press conference is about, and Doug Booklin has something. Okay, go ahead. Diane and then Doug. Okay.
I just wanted to mention, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, there was a meeting the other day of community activists, I think it was in Chicago, and they're planning legal action based on a violation of civil rights because of the heavy burden of school closings, especially in minority communities, and that they say this is a violation, specifically a civil rights violation. And since so many of the people who advocate school closings claim to be leading the civil rights movement, this is an interesting twist that I hope that the NYCLU will take a closer look at.
Absolutely, and we are. And I think that, another component of this is going to be graduation rates. That's another thing that these testing regimes are supposed to be a little bit about. And, we are entering into an era where you can't graduate from high school in New York State without taking 5 high-stakes tests. Let's look at the graduation rate changes over the next year and see what happens and see whether we're just sort of like failing to educate more kids or we're driving them out of school. Go ahead.
I just wanted, this is Michelle Fine, I want you to make a couple of more points that beyond the legal issues, and I was going to raise the school closing lawsuit, there is really momentum among major constituents to challenge high-stakes testing these days. There are parents all over the country who are voting for opt-out, who are challenging the Pearson field tests in New York City. There are educators all over the country. There are administrators. In New York State alone, 1,400 principals signed off on the do not test for teacher evaluation. Now, as of today, you've got 1,100 professors in Chicago. There was another set of university folks. As of tomorrow, New York City Council and other municipalities will be debating this issue. So there is a movement, and if University of Virginia is a reminder for us, when there is pushback, there might be victory. But I think people are really seeing the limits of a high-stakes testing strategy. What's amazing about New York is that we have 20 years of an alternative strategy in the Performance Standards Consortium, which has substantial evidence on student achievement, gaps between high achieving, low achieving, teacher retention. My last point is that the teacher retention data are quite distressing and expensive. And I think cities are starting to realize that they're paying a lot of money. I think the District of Columbia just released something like 58% turnover in a matter of 3 to 5 years of educators. It's extraordinarily expensive to keep bringing people in and retraining them. And there's good evidence that high-stakes testing environments is contributing to the low morale of educators. So I think on a number of fronts, there is pushback, and it's an uphill battle, but there is a crescendo.
Paul, I think your question was about whether there's a legal issue here, and certainly we would look for a legal issue. If we could find one, we'd certainly use legal strategies. I think what will happen is that there will be issues that result from the testing that may provide a legal basis for challenging the procedures. For example, if there are particular groups of students who are closed out of excellent schools or high-performing schools, that might well be a basis. So that could be English language learners. It could be students with disabilities. If we find that for example, team-taught classrooms go out of fashion because of the practice of testing teachers or assessing teachers based on student performance and only being able to test one teacher at a time, then that might be a basis. The issue of equal access is always a very strong issue in education, and equal access is under threat because of this testing focus.
Okay, Diane wants to say something. I'm getting good at this.
Okay, you're a great guy. So what you have to understand is that we got this high-stakes testing regime from Texas. Because if you remember when George W. Bush ran for president, he said there'd been a miracle in Texas. But when you look back over the last 10 years of federal testing, there was no miracle. Texas is in the middle, right where it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. There was no Texas miracle, but the whole country is stuck with this notion. What's happened in Texas now is the State Commissioner of Education, Robert Scott, at a press conference said that testing has become a perverse thing. It is ruining education. It's become the vampire that's eating the whole system. And he resigned as commissioner and has been replaced. But in the meanwhile, Texas school boards are voting one after another to roll back the high-stakes regime. There are now more than half the school boards in the state of Texas have said stop the high-stakes testing. So the place where it was born now is vying to be the place where this will be ended. But in the meanwhile, we've got a lot of persuading to do. And I think that Pedro is quite right. It may not be the public that needs persuading so much as it is to get the public to tell their public officials, that's enough, stop this, this is crazy, it's not good for education, and it's ruining the lives of children and educators.
And that's the same resolution actually being introduced tomorrow by the New York City Council, just so everyone's aware.
Okay. The Texas one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Rachel, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's slightly off, slightly askew from the topic of testing, but the state says that, or one of its defenses of its new testing regime is that the curriculum is going to be, they're raising the standards on their curriculum, and I'm wondering if anyone has thoughts on that part of that piece of the state reform going on right now.
Well, I can just give you one thought, which is that we're adopting a curriculum that has never been implemented anywhere in the United States. It was finished 2 years ago, and they have not field tested it anywhere. So we don't know whether it's good or bad, whether it'll actually increase the achievement gap between the high and low performers. And we don't yet have the tests that go with it. Eventually there will be tests to go with it. We don't know how good those tests are. So we're taking, I think Commissioner King says that they're building the airplane in midair. So we don't know whether the plane will fly or not.
Which is like really cool to think about that's going to be our avowed policy, building the airplane in midair. Okay.
And when it goes down, we know what neighborhoods it's going down in.
Yeah. Okay.
Consider the pressure on teachers right now. They have to institute the Common Core curriculum, which is new, which is untested. They have 80% of the actual assessments that are going to be done of teachers have to be created at the local level. 20% is this state are the tests given to the students. Only about 16% of teachers actually have students who are taking those particular tests this coming year, and that's in math and English language arts. So there's going to have to be a lot more money put into test preparation in lots of other disciplines within the schools. So actually the test industry is going to grow and grow and grow. This thing is going to just keep expanding. So, I go back to the point that we're implementing a system that is no system at all.
Okay. Ann?
I think we know quite a lot about what works with kids, what works in the point of view of engagement. And one thing that we know is that both teachers and students have to take ownership of whatever it is in order for them to really be engaged and to work at skills and be able to spend the time working through difficult readings. And lots of kids have trouble with that. If they're really interested in the material, they will make that effort. And I think it's important, if you in the report that you will all get, there are some sample papers, topics that students have chosen, and they differ from one from another. But I think they'll give you, if I read a few of them, they'll give you a little bit of a flavor of what these students were actually interested in. One of them is the stimulus package. Is this the decline of the American dream? An in-depth investigation of one aspect of the Recovery Act of 2009, including funding sources, allocations, and arguments for and against the legislation. Students got engaged in that topic in the classroom. And out of that came a very sophisticated 15 or 20 page paper with citations that the students submitted to qualify for the performance assessment. And you see that throughout the curriculum of students doing science experiments, applying mathematical understandings to applications, going outside and figuring out how to measure the distance to Staten Island using the Statue of Liberty. These are real problems, real issues, and real concerns that students got engaged in their classrooms. And I think if we forget, in assessment, the role that engagement plays and involvement plays on the part of students, we've lost half the battle. So I think it's both as teachers being engaged in curriculum and developing curriculum that's interesting to kids, and students being able to talk about the topics and to research topics that they have a particular interest in. And that's what gets real learning, and that's when kids learn the skills. And that's why it's an effective evaluation system.
Okay. Other questions? Let me
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Grace Tatter from Gotham Schools, and I had a question about policy in the Pike currently. In the legislative session that just ended, we had a few pieces about the multiple pathways to graduation in response to the elimination of the local diploma. Are there any other policies on the horizon like that that kind of do de-emphasize high-stakes testing?
Well, unfortunately, I think that the closest that we have to a policy that would de-emphasize high-stakes testing is an experiment that has proven results in a number of schools here in New York City, which is the Performance Assessment Consortium. And we have an indication of concern about the need for a change in how we hold students accountable, measure their success, how we hold teachers accountable, in the fact that hundreds of school administrators around the state signed a letter to the State Department of Education calling for an end to the high-stakes testing regime. So while this isn't all codified into a coherent proposal, there are opportunities on the table for the state to foster proven models that work, and there's a clear groundswell of opposition, dissatisfaction with the current regime that they've got to start listening to. And of course, I don't want to ignore the one of the catalysts for today's briefing, which is the petition from 1,100 academics. I mean, that qualifies as viral given the population of people who could possibly qualify to sign this petition. 1,100 academics from all fields of study in New York State who signed a petition calling for an end to this testing mania, but also offering their scholarly expertise to help come up with an alternative. So instead of, continuing to put this plane together in midair, we really need a clear recognition that, as they say, Houston, we've got a problem. Maybe it comes from Houston, and to start focusing on an alternative. Before I turn this over to Diane, I just want to say something about the report that Ann mentioned with the performance data of the Performance Standards Consortium. Few people have seen this report up until now, and what's in this report is dynamite. It's dynamite in the sense that this report documents with official data that the Performance Consortium works, that we have found a way, that Ann and her colleagues have found a way to provide education to children who are more vulnerable than the norm in New York City, more at risk than the norm in New York City, and with far better rates of success no matter how you slice it. Whether it's graduation, whether it's going to college, whether it's staying in college or succeeding in college, whether it's teacher retention. By every way that you look at the data, this is a model that works. It may not work for everybody. Nobody's saying it should be applied throughout the state, but it should be recognized and it should be allowed to continue to survive and thrive and figure out a way so that other schools can join the consortium if they are prepared to provide the kind of environment and standards for education that are currently provided in this too small, by my standards, group of schools. Okay, Diane.
Thank you, Donna.
Yeah.
So the question was, is the legislature or people in Albany thinking of other ways? I actually don't think they're thinking of any ways to roll back the high-stakes testing. The testing, the evaluation rubric, or this program that we have all signed the petition against, called the APPR. I can't remember what the initials are for. But the APPR, as Doug said, 20% is based on the state test, 20% on local test, and if a teacher is judged to be ineffective on the testing portion, that's 40%, she cannot pass. In other words, the 40% equals 100%. That's wrong.
Yeah.
And so what the state will be doing, and Doug also mentioned this, is they have to find a way to evaluate everybody, but only 16% of the teachers are teaching reading and math to children between the grades of 3 and 8. So the state will have to develop tests for everything. Tests for physical education, before and post, pre-test, post-test. Tests for science, tests for the arts, tests for everything that's taught, pre-test, post-test. This is a bonanza for Pearson or whoever gets all these juicy contracts. It will crush learning. What they're doing in other parts of the country to solve this problem is there are districts where they have now 52 new tests. This was in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. This is insane. And there are districts where they say, well, we don't want to create all these new tests, so we're going to say to the teachers, choose somebody else's score that you want to be identified with. This is equally insane. And there are districts and states where they've said, you'll be evaluated based on your school score. But all of this is just retrofitting to what is initially a bad idea.
Okay. Michelle.
So I've avoided saying the P word, but privatization is a big piece of this movement. It's a shifting of public dollars from classrooms, from public school educators, into the hands of publishing houses, test prep companies, which are then aligned with textbook companies, which are then aligned with teacher prep organizations. And now there's an outer ring of testing security companies because so many people are cheating. The Philadelphia Notebook had a beautiful letter from Confessions from a Cheating Teacher, who said, so it's unethical to cheat, and for me it's unethical not to cheat and deny my kids a high school diploma. So now we've got this outer ring of expenses around cheating, right? I actually don't want us to leave this press conference with the image of the villainous presence of tests. I want you to end with the image of what happens inside schools that dare to teach deeply and assess it through performance. Because for those of you who have not had the opportunity to be in any of these consortium schools, they are just stunning examples of teaching and learning as you would wish for anyone you care for. These are everyday kids. They are high poverty, racial, ethnic minorities, immigrant kids. Some of the schools are exclusively for English language learners. They are dedicated communities of educators who think seriously about Common Core standards. They're happy to do the standards as long as that doesn't over-determine how it gets assessed. And then they create these cultures of educators and young people and families and communities that are doing serious, deep work, and then to graduate in 4 years or 5 or 6, because sometimes it takes that. They have to write a long history essay. They have to critique literature, 2 kinds of literatures. They have to do a science experiment. They have to do an ethics project. And then they invite in people like me, university folks, and educators and parents to assess the student work. And I've had the privilege of being on some of these, and some of them are gorgeous. They're spectacular. We'd love to have them come to CUNY. Some of them are mediocre. And then we say at the end, honey, you're going to be a great writer, but you're going to revise this. And you're going to graduate in maybe 6 months, but you're not ready to be out of high school yet. And one of the things that these young people learn is that you can trust adults and you can learn to revise. And I had a doctoral student who's now an educator in this, major educator in the city, Laurie Charget, who tracks some of these young people into college. Again, these are just everyday kids. It's not a selective crowd. And not only do they graduate more and are more likely to go to college and stay in college and not do remediation, all of the data that Anne has, but the three big distinctions around these kids: first of all, they get to college and they are so pissed off because the teaching is terrible compared to the teaching they've had in high school. The second thing is that they're not scared to write essays. They say, so many of my roommates are scared of writing. I can't believe it. But the third is that they know about revision. They know that when they hit a bump in the road, they can find an adult and they can do it again. That is not the story for most working class kids when they get to college. They hit a bump in the road and they say, I'm out of here, I don't belong here anyway, my mom's got cancer, my brother's in trouble, I'm leaving. That's not what happens to these young people. And so there is a culture of deep accountability and assessment that's woven into the curriculum, that's woven into the culture, that's woven into the pedagogy, that's not separate, that's not corporate, that's not external, where you get the data 6 months later, you don't know what to do with it, and you just hide out of shame because you're a 2 or a 1.5. We're not saying the consortium is the only model for the state. We are saying the state has a treasure and should open itself up to multiple pathways. We've even offered to the commissioner and Regent Tisch that we would invite, that they should invite schools to come up with multiple pathways, and then we would do a systematic study to look at who's going to those schools, who's graduating, who's going on to college, what are the gaps between high-income and low-income kids, what are the teacher retentions. We've asked for a deeply transparent accountability system on their accountability system. So I just didn't want you to leave with just Texas in your brain. There's some beautiful assessment work right here in New York City and through the state.
Okay, so I want to thank everybody for coming. The NYCLU is truly honored to have this esteemed group of educators in the house with us. And I want to tell the folks on the phone that this report that we alluded to is not online. That's the bad news. The good news, it is coming online sometime soon at nyclu.org. We will post it with a link to the information, as a link to the information about this briefing.
The open letter is online.
The open letter is online already.
It's also worth noting there's also a letter from the superintendent of the Scarsdale schools on the website raising some very serious questions about high-stakes testing, and then the resolution that everyone mentioned earlier as well.
Okay. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John,
and
you
guys, thanks so much.
You.
Okay.